Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves, world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation.
Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios. It is a Sunday as we close out the weekend. The Braves closed out their road trip by taking yet another series up in Cincinnati. They had a chance for a sweep, a late opportunity to maybe steal one from the Reds, but ultimately that came up a little bit short. But it's hard to argue with a team that just continues to win series after series after series after series. The Braves have played 19 of those thus far, if my math is correct. They have won 16 of those series, and as we talked about last week, the Braves had not really reached that point until late August, a year ago, where they had won 14 series. It was nearly halfway through the month of August, so now you just keep stacking these things up because it was a little bit late in the year when the Braves started to kind of get their footing under them, but perhaps that helped them get a little bit of a running start into this year. I don't know. I don't know if you believe in that kind of momentum or not. Obviously, a lot of things had to happen between October of 2025 and February of 2026, and more to the point, late March, and all the way on through the latter portion of the month of May, which is where we are right now, about to say goodbye to the month of May, and hello to the month of June, and hello to summer, and all the other good things that are ahead for us. And if you're a baseball fan, as I assume you would be if you're listening to this show, we'll be saying hello to the All-Star break and the trade deadline and all kinds of other great storylines as we continue along. But the thing I can tell you here is, extra, read all about it. The Braves are still the best team in baseball because they continue to win series after series after series after series. And that is pretty much how this road trip played out for the Braves. There were some, I think, pressure points, if you will, as a fan, maybe some nervous watching, especially early on in Boston. I think there was a little bit of that nervousness in the Miami series, even when the Braves got beat up pretty good in that first game. They lost Drake Baldwin to the injured list, and you started to wonder, okay, is this the moment that things start to come unravel for the Braves? And as we've seen, series after series since then, it is in fact not the moment that things have come unravel for the Braves. In fact, I would really circle the word resiliency when it comes to this team. I would circle the word team more so than I would spend a whole bunch of time talking about any particular individual that's the driving force of this team, though we are going to talk about some of the individuals who are doing the things that you need them to do in order for this team to play at its absolute best. And those are obviously some very, I guess, vague terms that we're going to spend the next couple of hours getting a little bit more granular about, because that is the beauty of long-form talk, and that's what we've got here. But long story short, I just wanted to point out that the Braves, it's one of those things where this team is truly better because of the sum of the parts than any one particular player, which is a wild statement to make when you think about the fact that coming into the year, the Braves have one of arguably, and I would say it's a pretty solid argument, the three most talented players in baseball in Ronald Acuña Jr. But as we watch this first 7, almost 8 weeks play out, you kind of wondered when that guy was going to become that guy again. And I had an opportunity to come in a little bit earlier this week on Tuesday to spend the morning working with the morning shift. I clocked in early, drank my coffee extra early, made it through the whole 3 hours. No, I mean, I didn't have to do a whole lot. I didn't do the heavy lifting for that show, but I did share some Braves conversations with Allie Mack and with Bo Morgan, and Dylan Matthews was here too. He made sure we were on the air. Appreciate that. Takes a team, takes a village, if you will, and I think that's kind of where the Braves are at. It does take a village, and sometimes when you can't get the things you need to get from one person, well, somebody else in that line is going to step up and do the things they need to do. But more to the point here about the conversation I had with the morning shift was, I got in, and we're sitting down, and we're getting ready. I'm going to put you behind the curtain here. What do we want to talk about with the Braves here? Because, I mean, last year it was, all right, well, this guy's hurt and this guy's hurt and the Braves aren't good and What are they going to do here? Should they sell off these pieces? Is it time to cut bait with this? Every conversation that you had, and if you rode along with me on Sundays last year like my producer Dom did, then you know the kind of show that we were doing week after week after week after week, especially with the Sunday record that the Braves had a year ago, which was abysmal. You just kind of had to come in and say, all right, another series, they had the opportunity to win, slipped through their fingers. Instead, the Braves have become a team that is, number one, the winningest club in baseball. They have the most comeback wins in baseball. They're a great home team. They're a great road team. They're a great team in rubber matches. Everything, just check all those boxes. So as we sat down to talk about what do we want to discuss when it comes to the Braves on Tuesday morning of this past week, well, it was the question, is it time to have a discussion about Ronald Acuña Jr.? And I said, sure, we can have a discussion about Ronald Acuña Jr. What are you thinking? And we started to kind of workshop this idea, and it's like, he just hasn't played up to the expectations yet. Is it time to kind of point that out a little bit more? Is it time to turn up the heat, I guess, maybe a little bit on the conversation, on the dialogue that's being had about, okay, well, the Braves are the best team in baseball, but their best player has not been their best player to this point. But I have always, and I will continue to until he proves to me there's not a reason to do this, had this belief that there will be a time, and the timing's not mine, as many things in life are not my timing, that he will flip that switch and become that guy again. And the teams that he faces from that point on for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, whatever it is, they're going to be the ones that pay for the last 6 or 7 weeks that didn't go according to plan, because he's always going to get right. And that's kind of where it got to. But the timing, the irony of the timing of, is it time to have a discussion about the struggles of Ronald Acuña Jr.? And that always, it seemed to spawn some bigger, and I would say, in some cases, very tinfoil hat discussions about how the Braves would be better off without Ronald Acuña Jr. If you think that, congratulations. You're wrong. And somebody should tell you that. They're not better off for him. They didn't win the World Series without him. They had the opportunity to make trades to end up in that position because Ronald Acuña Jr. was the MVP of the National League for the first 90-plus games. You're not making any trades if that guy didn't go off and at least keep you in the area where you could at least consider, all right, we're not where we want to be, but what do we want to do now? You're 10 games under 500, going nowhere, listless. You're not making any trades to replace Ronald. You're just putting him on the injured list, and maybe you're making a deal to bring somebody in, or you're signing a bunch of free agents to minor league deals and just shuffling the roster and hoping for better than next year. But you just never know how these things are going to go. But I hate that narrative. The Braves, if you look at their record with Ronald Acuña Jr. versus their record without him, it's not even close. I hate that he wasn't a part of the 2021 postseason run, but this is a guy that every time he steps on the field, he makes the team better. And if you don't think that, you're lying to yourself. Just want to throw that out there so we can have that discourse, put that whole thing to bed. But the last few days have been a reminder about the kind of talent that we're talking about, and what makes a special player is the ability to do things at a level to which very few, if any, other players in the game, or at least on that team, are able to do it. And Ronald Acuña Jr., he is, in fact, that guy. He's still that guy. 2 leadoff homers over the weekend against Cincinnati, a huge grand slam against the Boston Red Sox. And we'll get into some of the stats and the history and all that other good stuff. I'll bring this up a few times because I spent enough time looking at it. But in the history of the game of baseball, since the modern rule for the stolen base was put into place in 1898, there have been 23 players that have hit 2 homers and stolen 2 bases in the same game. And Ronald Acuña Jr. is one of those 23 players now. He's the 4th Brave to do it. And we'll get into this a little bit more later because the list is fascinating. There's a Hall of Famer in there. There are 2 MVPs in there. There's a 2 Rookies of the Year in there. And then there's a wild card. I'll call it that. And we'll get into this a little bit later because we are going to discuss a lot of Ronald Acuña Jr. So I want to go ahead and let you adjust your expectations for what we're going to be diving into, because I think everybody's been waiting to see this version of Ronald Acuña Jr. explode onto the scene. Would you have liked it 3 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago? Sure. But you'll take it whenever you can get it. And when the team is already playing baseball at a level to which nobody else in the league is playing, now all of a sudden you start to wonder, and this has been my question. This has been what I've talked about, whether it was on the morning shift this past week, whether it was on any of the calls I do with Dukes and Bell, or Andy and Randy, or any other show that I've talked to, or just fans in general or online. I think there's another level to this team, to this offense that we still haven't seen. Because we haven't seen Ronald Acuña Jr. look like himself until the last 4 or 5 days. And trust me, I understand that Ronald Acuña Jr. can't hit a home run or two and steal a base or two or three every single game. I do understand. But my point is, this market was going to adjust. It wasn't going to stay in a steady decline because this guy is too damn good for it to be that way for that long. And sometimes it's just the littlest things that will get you going and some confidence. A shot of that to a guy that already plays with a passion and with a bravado. Sometimes you just need that. Just get that fire lit again. The pilot light went out. Maybe that's what was going on. But to see Ronald hit that grand slam over the Green Monster, thing of beauty, kisses the bat and spikes it on his way around the bases, involved in a big hit to help the Braves win a series in Boston. Then they come in Cincinnati. They win a series there. Ronald goes off again. Homers in all 3 games. So he's got himself a nice 4-game homer streak going on. And in the midst of all of that, he's stealing bases. He's walking. He's scoring runs. He looks like himself. And that's a beautiful thing to see. So when you start to think about getting Ronald Acuña Jr. back at that level, and you start to think about the season, and we're going to talk about this a lot too, that Michael Harris is putting together. I mean, not to toot my own horn too much, even though this is a show with my name on the marquee, I come into every year, saying, when they're like, who's your breakout guy? I'm like, look, I can't call him a breakout candidate. I had this discussion with Mike Johnson on the morning shift a couple of years ago. He's won the Rookie of the Year. So he's already broken out. He's already announced that, hey, I am here. I am a player to watch in Major League Baseball. So you can't, I guess, have a breakout season beyond that. Because the breakout is kind of like, it seems to be in line with at least your debut. You know, it is your welcome to the major leagues. This is who I am. And Michael Harris has provided us plenty of those moments and plenty of that over the last 4 years. But the roller coaster ride he was on, especially in 2025, it was just, when is this guy going to put it all together? And I've talked to Mike over the years. There is not, I mean, the Braves have a lot of these guys that are working hard, that care a lot, that are trying to figure this thing out. And it is a hard game. It is a humbling game. It is a game of failure. But you got to keep in mind the age of Michael Harris II. This guy is moving toward the prime of his career. That should be exciting. It should be scary for the rest of the league. And now all of a sudden, we're talking about a guy who's hitting 300 plus. We're talking about a guy that's making, as Walt Weiss has pointed out, and I asked him, what is the secret? What is the reason? What do you point to for Michael Harris's success? He said swing decisions. And you can see it. It doesn't mean he's not going to strike out. It doesn't mean he's not going to chase a pitch. Look, this is not a video game. It doesn't work that way. But he is making contact at an incredibly hard rate, and he is doing damage. And it's much, much, much more refined, I think, this year. And really it started in the second half last year as well, where Michael just kind of kept this work going. And sometimes you got to grind it out. And sometimes, as we talked about with Tim Hires on this show, and you can check out From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. You can find it on the Odyssey app as well. But I believe it was a couple weeks ago, I had Tim Hires on, sat down with him for about 10 minutes, and Michael Harris was a guy we talked about quite a bit. And you may think that, okay, well, I've gone through a bad patch, I'm going to adjust this, and I'm going to adjust this, and I'm going to adjust this. And all of a sudden it becomes too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many ingredients being thrown in by said cooks. You got your hitting guy, you got your dad, you got your brother, you got the guy that's just sending you the unsolicited advice, you got everybody online who wants to workshop what's wrong with your swing, you've got the actual hitting coach, and now you got to figure out, okay, well, who do I listen to, or do I just listen to myself and not change anything? And that's where I think Michael Harris was at that time. Not that everybody was just pushing it on him, but you know when you're not performing that you need to do something. And ultimately, he did make an adjustment with his hands, and he has reaped the rewards of the hard work. But we got to look at where they are now, the 30,000-foot view, as I like to call it, through 60 games in the Walt Weiss era. The Braves have the best record in baseball. They're 40-20. They're scoring lots of runs. They're preventing the other team from scoring lots of runs as well. And they're the first team in baseball to get to 40 wins this year, and yet another series victory over the weekend in Cincinnati as the Braves took 2 of 3 from the Reds after taking 2 of 3 from the Red Sox when it kind of felt like at times in that Red Sox series maybe things were going to start to get away from the Braves. Well, that guy, Ronald Acuña Jr., showed up and started to right the ship for himself and came up with a key grand slam as the Braves were able to take the finale of that series and move that momentum right on over to Great American Ballpark, which is a fun place for hitters. I don't think it's as fun a place for pitchers, though, just based on the dimensions of it. And we were looking at this in the StatCast information yesterday when Ronald Acuña Jr. hit that first home run, I think it was 368 feet to right field. Now, the graphic that shows up on the right, and if you get on this baseball savant stuff, then follow me, you know the column that says, this ball would be a home run in X of the 30 Major League Baseball parks. I think that's fascinating. I always want to know stuff like that. I think it's fun that we track that. Well, it said 21 of the 30 parks over there, so I thought, cool. All right, that ball must have been hit pretty well. Then you click on the link because then it'll give you the list of the 21 ballparks that would be a home run in and the 9 that it wouldn't. And you click on the link, and it says this ball would be a home run at Great American Ballpark and Yankee Stadium, and not in the other 28 parks. So I don't know what was going on over there, if there were gremlins in the machine at the StatCast headquarters. But either way, it was a home run in Cincinnati because that's where the Braves were playing. And there was nothing cheap about Ronald's second home run, which was a absolute rocket to center field. There was nothing cheap about that grand slam he hit over the Green Monster, and nothing cheap about those leadoff home runs that Ronald hit as well. Just a tremendous, tremendous showing from number 13 out in right field, and you needed to see it. You needed to see him start to get right because you started to think about, and I think in a lot of ways, just kind of imagine what this team can look like once that part of the equation has been solved. You get Ronald Acuña Jr. rolling. You got Michael Harris rolling. Can you get Drake Baldwin back in there? You got Matt Olson, who we'll talk about in a little bit, on pace for a gigantic season himself. You need to get Austin Riley going. That's going to be something that we'll dig into a little bit later, and we've talked about a lot. I've had Austin, my conversations with Austin, I've shared them with you here on the show. He's trying to figure this thing out, but it is just not computing at the level for the consistency that he wants. And I thought that was really fascinating, really telling about as the Braves got out of town, went out on this road trip, and even though they've been winning series, and even though they're sitting on this great record, I can tell you there's nobody that's sitting around watching themselves struggle and feeling the fact that, hey, I'm not coming through at the rate that I need to come through consistently enough, and just going to look at the winning and say, well, but I guess it's okay. No, everybody wants to be involved. Everybody wants to be doing their part, and Austin Riley's done it before. He has gotten on these massive heaters for 5 or 6 weeks where it just feels like, all right, load everybody up, put them on Austin Riley's back, and we'll see how far this offense can go. And that's not a slight to anybody else. Everybody else can take a swing or 2 or 3 as well, but that's just how good he is, and I think it's in there. But after 2 years of inconsistency and then obviously injuries that have cost him dearly as well, I think that this whole thing for Austin has been turned up to about an 11 on a 10 scale in terms of just the desire to finally put all of this behind him. And that's a difficult place to be mindset-wise. We'll talk about that a little bit with Scott Coleman coming up when he joins the show from Hammer Territory. If you haven't subscribed to the Hammer Territory podcast, I thoroughly endorse. If you want some nice daily, and you're talking about yeoman's work, this is coming from somebody that's called lots of minor league baseball games in a room by myself for 3 solid hours. This is coming from somebody that's done plenty of pregame and postgame shows over the years by myself. It is yeoman's work when you were sitting down there on a daily basis pumping out that content. But, hey, there's an audience for it. There's a desire for it, and you can get it from Hammer Territory. So be sure to check those guys out. That's just a little bit of a plug for my guys for making some time for me and for having me on their show as well over the years. I've always enjoyed talking baseball with them, and you'll get to hear that conversation with Scott coming up in just a little while. But kind of back to the point here. For the Braves offense, there are some things that are going really well, and some things that you still, I think, can imagine a little bit about what it could be like once you get it to the place you want to. And another one that you kind of have to start to imagine, okay, well, if you got Ronald doing this stuff and you got some of these other guys starting to contribute, Mike Yastrzemski's coming alive, Mauricio Dubon has been coming through in the clutch. How about Jorge Mateo? We got to get into that a little bit on this show. He just pushed himself into some regular at-bats here lately, and I don't blame Walt Weiss for cashing in on that whatsoever. That's not a knock on Ha-Seong Kim, who I still think is going to be an important player for the Braves before this season is said and done. We got 100-something games left, 102 games. You sometimes got to give it a little bit more time than you want to. But either way, the depth of this club has been a definite strength because isn't it nice to, even though somebody is struggling, to have an alternative? To be able to say, well, the good news is we've got so-and-so, we'll plug him in. Because I've watched the Braves for the last 2-3 years, and there's been a lot of, okay, this guy's not hitting. He's really not hitting. Do we have an alternative? No. All right. Where can we get somebody? I don't know. And then you end up signing these cast-offs from other clubs. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I had to watch Alex Verdugo play for 2 months last year, and I swear that took time off my career. Not saying I could do any better, but man, when you don't have the depth, that's my point here. Not trying to take a shot, but just make a point here. When you don't have the depth, it shows up You notice it. It's hard to ignore. It's not an elephant in the room. It is the room. You are in a place of struggle. But the Braves, they have guys this year. Mike Yastrzemski wasn't hitting so great. Well, Mauricio Dubon can play a little bit of outfield. We'll let him figure it out. And now Mike Yastrzemski has figured it out. In the past month or so, I think it's quieted down a lot of the discourse of, did the Braves make a mistake by signing him to a 2-year deal? Well, or did he have a bad month of April? More than one thing can be true. And we don't have to decide in the first 2 weeks. There's no return policy. You signed him. You own him. He's yours. Figure it out. And he did, to be more serious about it. But the fact that you got a Mauricio Dubon and a Dominic Smith, a guy that you picked up looking for work in the middle of spring training and has come in and had meaningful at-bats for you in the DH spot. And even guys who you're not expecting a whole lot out of, and Sandy Leon and Chadwick Trump. Well, Chadwick Trump got himself involved in a big comeback win for the Braves on the recent homestand. And those hits, they may be few and far between, but they do matter. And hopefully you get Drake Baldwin back in this mix sooner than later. And you get Sean Murphy back at some point, and you start to, again, to use that word again, imagine what this club can look like once you actually get to assemble all the pieces. This is like watching all of those MCU movies like over and over and over. You start with Iron Man, then Iron Man 2, you watch the Hulk, and you wonder why Edward Norton was ever in it. And then you get over it. Mark Ruffalo comes in, and then you watch Thor, and then you watch Captain America, the first one, the first Avenger, which I still think is way up there on my list, but I'm a Cap guy. And then they finally put them together as the Avengers. But then you watch all these movies, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for Captain America to say one single line of dialogue. And you're waiting, and you're waiting. And they tease you with it, and then they don't let him finish. And then finally, you get to the 18th or 19th, whatever it is, movie in the series, the Endgame, and he finally gets to tell the Avengers to assemble. That's what it kind of feels like with the Braves and their health. And some of these guys, it's like, well, we get this guy back, and this guy back, and this guy back. I'm not going to say that's an exciting place to be because the injuries are obviously frustrating. But when you think about the accomplishment of the team right now, the resilience of the club right now, the versatility of some of the pieces that you've been able to use, not just off the bench, not just to plug places in the lineup, but also to kind of build out your pitching staff. I mean, if I had told you that not only are Spencer Schwellenbach and Hurston Waldrop going to get hurt in spring training, but they're going to have to move Reynaldo Lopez to the bullpen. And by the way, they're not going to sign a free agent pitcher in spring training either. All those veterans you're looking at, they're not going to sign one. I can imagine in my mind a group of fans that would say it but probably not do it with pitchforks and torches heading toward the battery trying to figure out who's going to be in our starting rotation besides Chris Sale. And if you told them, don't worry about it, Bryce Elder is going to have a career year, I don't think that would have been met with the same optimism that it is now that you've watched him actually do it. You've seen the math be done. You got Spencer Strider back. Grant Holmes, I think, has done some pretty good work. And Martin Perez, credit to him, has been kind of just this nice, indispensable piece that the Braves were able to plug in there to at least turn the rotation over 1 through 5. I think we'll see J.R. Ritchie again. I think we'll see Didier Fuentes get into the rotation at some point. They're doing a lot of important work for him, in my view, as a 20-year-old in the big leagues, which, again, I cannot stress that enough. You can look at the arm talent and think, okay, well, why didn't this guy strike everybody out? Well, he's 20 years old. He's still trying to figure out the things that come with it. And as we saw the other day, I think it was game 2 of the series, you can throw 100 miles an hour. But if you put it right down the middle, a major league hitter probably not going to miss as much as you'd think. But that's just one of the many lessons that you learn. Location, execution, the arsenal. But I think Didier Fuentes has proven not only is he A, resilient, and B, talented, maybe flip those around, but he has learned those lessons. He's got the aptitude. And I think he's benefiting so much from how the Braves are using him right now versus you could be down in Gwinnett starting every 5th game. And if that's a case to be made, if they want to do that when they need to stretch him out again and bring him back, I can understand that. But if you look at just pure arm talent on the Braves' entire pitching staff, to me, it's Robert Suarez and Didier Fuentes. Then there's a space. Well, not too much of a space. Then you got Chris Sale. And then a little space there. And you got Spencer Strider. And I know Spencer's still trying to figure some things out. Been a little bit homer prone. Hasn't had the performances be quite as, I think, smooth as he would like them to be thus far. But more good than bad. I'll put it that way. What he did against the Dodgers just kind of reminded you that, hey, he's still in there. And I think that Spencer Strider is starting to kind of figure this thing out. And he would not probably say that yet, but I think that it's getting there. But again, you start to imagine what this club can look like once it's fully assembled. and you do have Drake Baldwin back in the lineup, and you do get Sean Murphy back a little bit later, and you do start to see Ha-Seong Kim play like the player that he was in 23-24 before the injuries derailed his career last year, and he had that weird finger injury before spring training this year that slowed him down. I mean, this was a guy that 15, 17 home runs, 20 to 30 steals, Gold Glove defender. You're telling me that we can throw a guy like that in the mix? I just got to kind of wait for him to get acclimated and figure it out. And if, it doesn't work out at the rate you want it to, that you got this other guy, Jorge Mateo, who led the league in stolen bases a couple of years ago for the Orioles and has some talents himself, we can utilize him too. Or you can put Mauricio Dubon wherever you want to. You've got the right kind of guys. You've got the right kind of players. You got the right kind of mix. And that ultimately means a lot when you've been able to assemble a roster like this that the Braves have been able to assemble. It's a big part of their success. We're going to talk about some of those pieces as we continue along here. Michael Harris II just continues to break out this year. I'm going to use that word. He's breaking out. Maybe he's just putting it all together. We'll discuss the secrets to that, or the science behind it, or maybe both, as we continue on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
This your place for all things MLB and our Braves. This is From the Diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
From the Diamond continues right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. I am Grant McAuley, live from the Kia Studios. On a Sunday, we wrap up our weekend. Braves done with their road trip. They took 2 out of 3 in Cincinnati. That followed the 2 out of 3 they took in Boston. They'll come home, enjoy an off day on Monday, and then get started with the Toronto Blue Jays for a 3-game series, followed up by 3 more against the Pittsburgh Pirates. So it will be a very 1992 postseason-centric kind of feel there. But on Tuesday, and I'm hoping to have a chance to catch up with him, but David Justice bobblehead for the 1995 World Series is going to be given away at Truist Park. So David Justice will be on hand for that. That'll be very exciting. Looking forward to maybe hearing a little bit of David Justice's take on those great teams of the 1990s and a little bit about what it was like for him to play for Bobby Cox as well. I think you might have heard last week I got a chance to catch up with Braves catcher Javi Lopez, talk a little bit to him about those and some of the great memories. And there were, goodness knows, a lot of them in the 1990s. And it's hard to find too many that are bigger or better than that David Justice home run that helped the Braves win the 1995 World Series. So look out for that. In the industry, we call that a tease, and hopefully I'll be able to pay that off next week. That's my intention. As far as teases go, though, I think a lot of Braves fans were teased by the potential of Michael Harris II turning himself into an all-star caliber player. And I'm here to tell you, he is well on his way this year. It's not a slow start. It's not another false start with an injury, and now you got to kind of wait around and figure out when you're going to see the Michael Harris that you want to see, the guy that won the Rookie of the Year. What's he going to do for an encore? Well, he's had himself a pretty solid career, and I think that sometimes folks, they look at what Michael Harris has done or not done, and they don't, I think, recognize, or maybe it's, let me back up. They look at what he hasn't necessarily done yet, and they fail to kind of look at what he has been able to do. Because if you look at Michael for the first couple of years, 114 games, called up a little bit later on in the 2022 season, 27 doubles, 19 homers, 64 runs batted in, stole 20 bags, hit .297, OPS of .850. That's kind of the high water mark for Michael Harris. And obviously, the Gold Glove defense, or Gold Glove caliber defense, that needs to be crowned at some point. Would love to see that be the case this year. And then he follows it up. Hits .293, 18 homers, 57 runs knocked in, 20 more steals in 2023 as part of that vaunted Braves offense. But really, you started to see, I think, the frustrations of the roller coaster ride that he was on in 2024. He went through another injury. I believe it was a hamstring at that point that cost him a significant amount of time. He only played 110 games in 2024, but he came back. He got hot. He was the only Braves hitter that seemed like he was ready to go for the very brief postseason trip out to San Diego in 24. But last year was just baffling in the first 3 months of the season because you know how talented this guy is. But it just was not happening. Some home runs were happening. Some RBIs were happening. But I'll tell you what wasn't happening was walks. And there was also just a lot of empty at-bats for Michael. He struck out a career-high 128 times. His on-base percentage was under 270. And that's a tough look, especially when you hit 249. So basically the walks are essentially non-existent. And you saw for the fourth consecutive year that his OPS went down from the year before. But there was that, I want to say, 6 or 7 week stretch in the second half where Michael Harris became the hottest hitter in baseball. And it was almost inexplicable considering how much he had struggled in the first half of the season. But now we're starting to see, pretty much from the jump of this year, month 1, month 2, and a few days in March, that he's hit 13 homers. His career high is 20, by the way, and he's only got 102 games to add on to that, chase that down. 36 runs knocked in. He's hitting over 300, and his OPS nearly 870 is a career high for him. And I loved what we saw out of Michael Harris on Sunday because he was, as the Braves were down to their last out, grinding out an at-bat to draw a walk to load the bases. Now, I know Matt Olson made an out on the very first pitch of the next one. We don't have to dwell on that. But to see those kind of at-bats in big spots where Michael Harris is not up there just expanding the zone and trying to swing for the sake of swinging, he's up there with a plan. He's making much smarter swing decisions. And we're seeing a Michael Harris that just keeps on keeping on with this tremendous start. Another multi-hit game for him on Sunday. He's got 7 multi-hit games in his last 12, had the 2 walks, and he's also hitting in the number 2 spot of the batting order, which longtime listeners of this show, and I hope there are some of you listening out there, would know that I've long looked at Michael Harris and thought he can run, he makes pretty good contact, he's got power, he can be a run producer, he's not clogging up the bases, so you're not worried about that. This guy just profiles as a number 2 hitter, doesn't he? But very seldom were they running Michael Harris out there in the number 2 spot. Now, I also have to go back and point at myself and say, not so fast. You also said Drake Baldwin could be a great number 2 hitter for the Braves. And, well, I'm happy to be right twice. But they both can't hit second. But these are the kind of problems you want to have when you're constructing a lineup where you can say, okay, we've got lots of good hitters. But the number 2 spot of the batting order felt like something the Braves were constantly trying to solve, whether that was moving Matt Olson up or bringing in Jurickson Profar, which I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin in that right now because that ain't going to happen this year. Not going to help. Would love to not see it happen next year either because I think the club's better off. Be that as it may, you've got some really good problems to have. But Michael Harris has also had success up and down the batting order this year because as much as we talk about Mauricio Dubon hitting everywhere in the lineup, playing everywhere on the field, they've had Michael Harris pretty much anywhere between, I think, leadoff and 7th, maybe or 9th, actually, in the lineup, which was kind of where he was having all that success. And a lot of people just kind of argued, yeah, just leave him there. But one day, you want to get more at-bats, more plate appearances for Michael Harris. And this version of Michael Harris, I want to get him to the plate as much as I possibly can because he has figured it out. And that's a beautiful thing to see because you know that he's been through it in order to get to this spot. But his career high in home runs is 20. He's 7 shy of that. He just set that career high in homers last year in 160 games. So he has a very good chance to shatter that. He's on pace for 36 home runs. He's on pace as well for a 90 RBI season. We haven't seen that from Michael Harris. 86 last year. And again, some of the counting stats look okay at first glance. But when you went deeper into it, and of course, if you watched the first half of the season last year, you understood some of the challenges that Michael Harris had to go through in order to become the hitter that we saw in the second half and the hitter that we're seeing this year. And I would say that the work has certainly paid off for him. And then you got to go back and remember, again, I've said this before, and I just want to make sure it's something that's just brought up as many times as it needs to be. This guy just turned 25 before the season. So if you're getting a little bit impatient with him, keep in mind, he is just now moving into the years that should represent his prime years. Now, I understand guys come up earlier, guys get off to a great start. Maybe they have a longer prime because they just hit the ground running and do special things. Ronald Acuña Jr. is a great example of that, but there aren't too many of those guys out there that perform it at that level. And the expectation that comes with playing beside a guy like that, and in an organization that's had players like that, sometimes just it brings a little bit more to the table. But I think Michael Harris has done a really good job of getting himself where he needs to be this year and really contributing to the club's success as far as an offense is concerned. But speaking of Ronald Acuña Jr., not just hitting homers and stealing bases and looking a lot more like the guy that the Braves expected to see at the top of the order, but his 39th career leadoff homer happened on Sunday. He hit his 38th career leadoff homer on Friday. So a couple of those, and that huge grand slam Thursday in Boston has the home runs flying. The last 4 days alone for Ronald Acuña Jr., 4 days, mind you, 6 for 13, 5 homers, 9 runs knocked in, 5 runs scored by some very simple math from the 5 homers, 4 steals and 4 walks as well. So he's finding his way on base. He's driving in runs. He's leaving the park. He's doing it all. 5 homers over the past 4 days. And a 2-homer game that we talked about a little bit earlier that also had 2 steals in the same game, something you don't see too often. I wanted to give you that list of players. 4 Braves have done it. 23 players in Major League Baseball since 1898. 2 or more home runs and 2 or more steals in the same game. Again, it's hard to do. The guys who've done it for the Braves, Hall of Famer Chipper Jones. Not a surprise. Rafael Furcal, Rookie of the Year in 2000. Speed, sneaky power. All right. Ronald Acuña Jr. Makes a ton of sense. Speed and power. Check, check. Got both those boxes. The 4th guy to do it, though, is Ender Inciarte. But of all the places to do it, he did it in Colorado. Now, Ender was not known as the home run hitter. He could steal some bases, certainly. But to just have a game like that just kind of, clicks and checks a couple of boxes that not very many hitters, if any, have been able to do in the history of baseball. And this was an eclectic list, too. You see Shohei Ohtani on there. You saw Brandon Phillips, his former Brave, who'd been a 30-30 guy on there. And then there's a host of names as you go back and start looking and you think, who in the world is that? But this had only happened 6 times between 1898 and 1993. So basically the last 17 times have happened in the last 33 years. So basically every other year you got somebody doing it on average. So it happens a little bit more now. But I wouldn't have thought it would happen so much because stolen bases had kind of exited the game, it felt like, from a risk management standpoint until we started talking about the bigger bases that Major League Baseball put into play, 2-3 years ago. Regardless, it's a fun little quirky history note that Ronald Acuña Jr. has been able to join a very, very small group of people when it comes to home runs and stolen bases, but it should be surprising absolutely no one. But I'm just thinking about, again, dreaming on, imagining where exactly Drake Baldwin fits in when you start to put this lineup back together. I think he goes back to the number 2 spot personally. I think you go Acuña, you go Baldwin, you go Olsen, then cleanup. Does Michael Harris fit there? He could. Does Ozzie Albies fit there because he's a switch hitter? Now, Ozzie's kind of been through it lately over the past 3 or 4 weeks. A very long lull with a lot of singles and not as many of those as you would hope. But he's still, on the whole, having himself a pretty good year, looking a lot more like the Ozzie Albies that the Braves needed to see. And still a lot of baseball left to be played. I think he still fits in that, especially if he gets a chance to mash against left-handers. Then maybe you put Michael Harris in at 5, and at some point, you're trying to figure out where Austin Riley fits in all of this. And we will get to this later on in the show, because I know this is kind of it's a thing we do where even if you've got the best record in baseball, even if you're winning series after series after series, even if your offense is the best in the National League, your pitching staff is many metrics the best in the National League, if not all of baseball, you still got to find the things that you want to improve. The team is also that way, both collectively and individually, trying to figure out how to get to that next level, to find that consistency. And that, I think, is the thing that Austin Riley, among many things that he could find, would help him the most, is just that good, consistent approach and some consistent results, because that will build confidence. And again, if you start to do that, just look at Ronald Acuña Jr. the past few days. You don't think that he was kind of feeling it a little bit in the confidence department? He knows how good he is. You don't need to tell him that. But you get into the game, you punch out 4 times, drop a ball in right field or third base, you're not feeling great. So a little bit of confidence can go a long way. And I think that ultimately that's something that can be found over the course of a long baseball season, but you have to continue to do the work. And I thought Austin had some pretty good swings on Sunday. I think Walt Weiss talked about this in the postgame as well. He had one liner with the bases loaded, and I think his second or third at bat, they got run down by the center fielder, ended up being a sac fly. But if that ball gets over the center fielder, gets down, we're probably talking about a different ball game. No 2 ways about that. But we got some other guys that we're going to be talking about when it comes to the Braves offense as we continue rolling along. We've also got to get into a discussion I had with Scott Coleman of Hammer Territory, who's going to jump on the show. And we're going to dive into many of the things going on for the Atlanta Braves thus far through the first 60 games. What's had the Braves off to this start? What do we like? What do we need to see as the season rolls on? We'll discuss that next right here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app. Welcome back in to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday as we close out the weekend. The Braves have wrapped up their road trip, and now they'll be coming on home to welcome the Blue Jays and the Pirates to town. But before we get into all that, I want to welcome my next guest into the show. He is Scott Coleman of Hammer Territory. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts. Well, Scott, I appreciate you making some time for me to join the show, to talk a little bit of Braves. And as we were kind of chatting before we got started here, this feels like a much better year to be talking about the Atlanta Braves on a regular basis, doesn't it?
Hey, Grant, thank you for having me on. And I mean, you said it. This is night and day from what we had to suffer through last year, maybe the stat of the season so far. So on Saturday, the Braves, of course, won their 40th game. The Braves did not win their 40th game until July 9th last year. So we're talking a difference of 6 weeks or so. The Braves were 40-51 last year when they finally won their 40th. So just night and day difference, and it's been so much fun to watch.
Absolutely it has. I've joked with people that it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz when you go from black and white to Technicolor. You know, you're just back to what you feel like is your regularly scheduled program because for so many years, the Braves are right there. They're doing their winning. But last year was a big-time departure from that. And I think it was culture shock for a lot of people, too. And now you're starting to see that maybe the talent is still there. Maybe some health, maybe some adjustments, some other things all needed to be thrown into the mix. Heck, maybe a new manager, new coaching staff is also to credit for a lot of the things that have gone right here. I don't think it owes to just one thing, but I will say this. Atlanta's offense is once again one of the best in baseball, and I think there is another level that this group can reach, particularly with Ronald Acuña Jr. and Austin Riley contributing. We haven't seen as much of that, but Ronald lately, I mean, you know, the expectations with him, they are what they are because he is who he is, but it's nice to get a little reminder the past few days that it seems like he may be starting to return to normal. What I noticed was a lot of fastballs were giving him some trouble, but perhaps that adjustment has now been made. Scott, I'm curious, let's lead off with Acuña. What are you seeing from the former MVP that has led to this? I'll call it a turnaround here over the past few games on this road trip.
I think Ronald is now healthy. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Of course, he distanced himself from the hamstring pull, and then he had that weird hand and thumb injury down in Miami. But as he's distanced himself, he just looks like Ronald Acuña Jr. again. And it looks like he's having fun. You know, I think when Ronald is really going, he's joking around on the base pass and in the dugout. And I'm sure he was frustrated just as much as anybody when he was kind of going through it. But he is really awoken. And it was great to see him hit it's kind of like a fastball sinker out for a home run on Saturday night. He also launched that grand slam in Boston, which really, to me, kind of felt like he got the weight of the world off of his shoulders. And then also good, you know, Ronald, whenever he's locked in, he just commands the strike zone so well. He's walked a lot the last few days, which is usually an early sign that he's feeling good. And then finally, you know, he stole a couple of bases, too, over the weekend. And that's also just another just tipping point in that he feels good. His hamstring feels good. And he's back to being just the incredibly dynamic player who can just take over a baseball game.
Yeah, and I guess at this point, for the folks that were kind of concerned about the first 6 or 7 weeks of the season, they don't have to feel like the Braves need to trade Ronald Acuña Jr. immediately now that he's back to looking like the guy that he is. And I dug up this stat last night because I was just genuinely curious because Ronald's such a special player. 2 home runs and 2 steals in the same game. And I went back to 1898. That's as far as Baseball Reference would go for me. 23 times that has happened in baseball history. That's what Ronald Acuña Jr. did on Saturday up in Cincinnati with his 2 homers and his 2 steals. 4 Braves had done it. These are some names you'd expect. Chipper Jones, Rafael Furcal, Ronald Acuña Jr. One you might not expect, Ender Inciarte. But be that as it may, I mean, that kind of game and the kind of games that we've been seeing here lately with the walks, the steals, and the homers, that feels just a lot more like Ronald Acuña Jr., doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, that's a great stat pull. I mean, shouts to Ender Inciarte. I mean, he was a good player, but I would not have guessed Ender for who was the other Brave to do that. But yeah, I mean, it's a quick reminder of how good this guy is. Of course, the injuries for Ronald have been just crushing. In some ways, they have become somewhat of the story of his incredible career so far. But when he's healthy, I mean, there may not be 2 or 3 more people on the earth who are more dynamic and just naturally gifted on a baseball field than Ronald Acuña Jr. And it's crazy to say, Grant, the team has, you know, they get to 40 wins, they're the fastest to 40, and a lot of that was without Acuña doing the things we know he can do. It really does give you reason to be excited moving forward.
Yeah, another guy who we haven't really seen as much from this year as we'd certainly like and as much as he would like is Austin Riley. So we'll get into his struggles a little bit more here in just a moment. But when you think about the Braves lineup and the things that needed to go right this year, if you were going to tell me that heading into the month of June, the Braves are going to be best record in baseball, huge lead in their division, biggest in baseball, everything's going to be going right, I would not have guessed that Ronald Acuña Jr. would just now be getting hot and that Austin Riley would still be searching for it. But here we are, staring at the month of June here, and this is exactly who the 2026 Braves have been. And I think that's a huge credit to the group as a whole, as much as it is to any single player that we've watched this year.
In some ways, I think that's almost like the story of the season is these role players, these unexpected contributors who have just stepped up in the biggest way imaginable. Dom Smith has a ton of huge hits. Mauricio Dubon has been remarkably clutch this year. Even Jorge Mateo has stepped in a big way as shortstop has kind of wavered as Ha-Seong Kim has been so slow out of the gate. Jorge Mateo's had big hits. On the pitching side, Martin Perez, who maybe came to spring camp as like the 9th or 10th option in the organization. Martin Perez has given them good innings. It's just, I think that's for as good as the stars have played to an extent. I think the under the radar, maybe guys like 15 to 26 on the roster have just been so good for this team the first 2 months and are a big reason why they've been so successful.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. We're chatting with Scott Coleman of Hammer Territory here on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. I had a chance to catch up with Mauricio Dubon on the homestand and ask him a little bit about, the chemistry of this team or the way that it has come together. And that's one of the number one things he credited was we've got a whole bunch of guys who just want to win, and they'll do the things that it takes to win. And if you can't be out there, what can I do to help the guy that is out there has been kind of the mindset of that. And I think that really speaks to the kind of teammate Mauricio Dubon is, but overall, what the Braves have been able to assemble here this year. And you brought up some great names. Dominic Smith has given the Braves some tremendous at-bats and production from the DH spot. Jorge Mateo, I think, has vastly outproduced even the most optimistic appraisal of what he could be to the Braves, and he's found some more at-bats in doing so. And Dubon is not just a guy who helps the bench out because he's a Swiss Army knife, and he's been out there just about every day for this club. And after a slow start, you can throw Mike Yastrzemski in the mix as somebody else who's been contributing to this club. I, Scott, think this is the best group of reserves I can remember the Braves having since like the Martin Prado, Omar Infante days. How about you?
Yeah, that's a great call. And, Mauricio Dubon has been so valuable just being able to play wherever. He's played short, he's played left field, he's played center field, he's played third base for a day or two. Like, it's so valuable. And, and to me, Dubon just feels exactly like those two players you mentioned, Martin Prado, Omar Infante, who are just so valuable, beloved. And I think Dubon has very quickly endeared himself to Braves fans. And, having depth really matters over the course of a 6-month season. You can feel like for someone like Ha-Seong Kim, right? He gets the $20 million contract. He starts really slow out of the gate. Because you have this depth that you can comfortably sit Kim for a couple of days, let him reset mentally, physically, maybe get some extra work in the batting cages, and you don't feel like you're crushing your team's chances that night because you do have the depth and talent that you can go to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I will throw this out there, and I'm going to stand on this, and if I'm wrong, I'll be wrong and I'll own it, but there's a lot of baseball left to be played. I think Ha-Seong Kim still has a role for this club that's going to involve his contributions to make this a better team overall. But as far as hitters are concerned that we've been watching the past few years, the one that's been, I think, the source of more discussions than any other is Michael Harris. There are some other contenders, Austin Riley certainly one of them, but Harris's 2025 was bafflingly bad for 3 months or so. Then he finally found his way and became as hot as any hitter in baseball as the second half got started. Now, Walt Weitz told me it's swing decisions that have made all the difference. I'm inclined to agree with that. How about you? What are you seeing from Michael Harris that is leading to what I would say is his best stretch of baseball in a Braves uniform at the plate?
Yeah, I think with Mike, it's just when he makes contact with the ball, he hits it so hard.
Yep.
Like if you look at his expected numbers, his exit velocities, his barrel rate, even like his bat speed, like he's swinging the bat really hard and just crushing the baseball whenever he makes contact. And you know what? I think at this point we've seen enough of Michael Harris that he's going to be a free swinger. And, the walk rate is still pretty low. He's bottom percentile. He's first percentile in chase rate. But you know what? I've kind of come to accept it. And this is who he is, because when Mike makes contact with the ball, he's hitting it so hard. And sure, would we like to see a couple more walks? Mm-hmm. That would be great. But you can't complain about what Michael Harris has done. He has bounced back in such a big way. He's been fantastic at the top of the order. He just gives the Braves another dynamic option who can change a game with one swing of the bat.
Yeah, he's been terrific, and really he's hit all through the order, and I really had thought that once he gets going, and I don't know that it has to be as hot as it's been here, but as consistently as it's been this season, he always made sense as the number 2 hitter in this lineup to me. But then, of course, Drake Baldwin came in and did what he did, so who am I to argue with the Braves' embarrassment of riches when it came to options for that? And hopefully they'll have Baldwin back in the mix soon. Now, if everybody's excited to talk about Harris and what he's done this year, Austin Riley's season has been going by a very different script. he had a great spring. Then he started slow. The walks were there at first. The strikeouts were down. He told me he was kind of feeling caught in between on the approach about, trying to let things come to him and not trying to be too aggressive. Then I feel like he flipped that switch a bit, and now we've just seen this roller coaster of results. You get a reminder of exactly who he is. The bat speed's still there, but the bottom line is, while we know that the talent is in there, the results and the consistency haven't been. And I think after 2+ years of injuries and inconsistency, it's hard to imagine that Riley's not feeling some kind of way about how his season has gone thus far.
Yeah, I'm sure Austin's frustrated. He had a pinch hit appearance on Saturday night, and he had a chance to drive in a run, and he ended up just popping the first pitch up, and he kind of slammed his bat, and that's something we generally don't see from Austin. But, he's frustrated, and you look at the numbers, he's running about a 30% strikeout rate on the season, which is well above what you would like to see. And, it's a concerning trend, and you mentioned it, and we're really about 2.5 years of baseball now since we've seen a healthy, really productive Austin Riley. I will say, again, it's kind of the theme of this conversation so far, the Braves are winning games, and they've been able to do it without Austin. Austin, of course, has some just legendary streaks over the summer months in particular where he has just put the team on his back. Maybe one of those are in the cards. Let's all hope for that. But it is. I think as we sit here end of May, early June, I think the concern level with Austin Riley is certainly being elevated, and it sure would be nice to see him go on a bit of a streak here.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing for a hitter, and this is from talking to him and a number of other guys, is like you can't just stop thinking altogether because, these are human beings and not robots as well. So if you think you've noticed what's going on out there or what's not going on, I can promise you they've noticed it, they've felt it, and they're living through it as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic and a very interesting tightrope that you have to walk. And conversation I had with Tim Hires not long ago is how do you reach 13 different hitters who are in different places, both with their productivity on the field and how they're feeling, and also mentally and physically what they're kind of battling to get the best version of them out there. And it does take a lot of patience to play this game because it is, of course, a game of failure, as you and I both know. Now, the pitching side for the Braves has seen an incredible job being done in the rotation and the bullpen. The injury bug bit, and it bit hard in spring training, but with Chris Sale and Bryce Elder leading the way, Spencer Strider came back from his oblique strain. Grant Holmes and Martin Perez are chipping in. And this group of starters has been surprisingly good. And other guys have made contributions as well. And there could be some reinforcements coming in the next month or two. But when Atlanta didn't add this winter, Scott, I was skeptical. But with these numbers that we've seen thus far, the production of the group that's on hand, and how badly some of the free agent pitchers who signed elsewhere are throwing, it all kind of worked out in hindsight, if you're into that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Grant. I'm sure you had conversations too at the start of the year, but when they had all those injuries in the spring, man, it was scary. And looking back on it, it's amazing, that they have the best record in baseball, and they've done it without Spencer Schwellenbach and without Hurston Waldrop, and Strider missed the first month. And, it's a testament to some guys who have stepped up. And, even if they haven't necessarily stepped up the entire season, they filled in. Of course, J.R. Ritchie is back in Gwinnett, but J.R. threw the ball well a couple of times. Martin Perez has been a really nice pickup for the back of the rotation. Grant Holmes has been serviceable enough in that kind of 4th, 5th starter spot. And you just have to hope that you can get some of these guys back. And then, of course, at the top of the rotation, Chris Sale has been just a monster. Bryce Elder's had a renaissance that's been so much fun to watch. Good to see Spencer Strider throwing the ball pretty well here. So, yeah, it's a little bit of duct tape and glue to keep this rotation together. But I think you said it. If you can just get a little healthier and then maybe make an addition at the trade deadline to really bolster your chances to do something special in October. But I think you have to just take what you've gotten from the pitching staff, especially the rotation, all day long.
Yeah, the Braves would certainly like to add, I still do think, through the trade deadline period. And if you're not able to do that, and you've got Hurston Waldrop and A.J. Smith-Shawver on the horizon, you've got Spencer Schwellenbach maybe a little while after that, at least you have some options who could be in the fold to help you out with that. And I don't know if we've seen Reynaldo Lopez start his final game for the Atlanta Braves just yet either. But let's wrap up with this. The back end of the bullpen has been dominant, among the best in Major League Baseball. What a theme for the Braves this year. Robert Suarez has been a difference maker. We expected that. Some folks, though, were skeptical about Raisel Iglesias coming back again. And, those two combined have given you some serious veteran high-leverage firepower. Then all of a sudden, Dylan Lee has been every bit as good as well. I think we knew that Dylan Lee was a contributor, but Scott, it's pretty nice to have that, I'll call it three-headed monster at the back end of the bullpen. And with that and the rotation pitching as well as it has really allowed Walt Weiss to kind of reverse engineer how he wants to use his bullpen more nights than not.
It really has. And, I think the secret sauce for this team is that trio of relievers at the end of games. And it's just remarkable how good that group has been. Rysel has been nearly automatic. Robert Suarez. I mean, this guy, I think, was second in saves in the majors the last couple of years. And he's your eighth inning guy now. Dylan Lee, I mean, set aside just being one of the best lefty relievers, but Dylan Lee is just flat out one of the best relievers in the game. And he's your seventh inning guy. Yeah. And then I thought, too, really good to see Tyler Kinley has kind of gotten out of that mini funk that he had. He has thrown the ball really well. Didier Fuentes has been awesome in that bullpen role. And, even like Dylan Dodd, like quietly under the radar. Dylan Dodd had a really nice 2025, and he's continued that in a limited sample this season. So this bullpen, we know that bullpens can just carry a team come October. Let's hope you can get these guys healthy and firing come playoff time, should we get there, because that really does feel like if the Braves can have a lead after 5 or 6 innings, you have to take your chances just about every night with this group.
Well, about 40% of the way through the season, and the Braves, the first team in baseball to get to 40 wins, the best record, the biggest lead, all those things have you feeling good about what you just talked about, what it looked like come October. But as you well know, and I well know, and everybody listening out there is probably aware, there's a lot of baseball between now and then, but the Braves have put together a lot of the pieces that have you feeling pretty good about the direction they're heading. Scott, let everybody know about Hammer Territory, where they can find you, Brad, and the whole gang over there for the great work you guys do.
Yeah, we do. We run the Hammer Territory podcast. It's available Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to your shows. We do 4 or 5 shows a week during the season, talking all things Braves, of course, game breakdowns, news. It's almost the best time of the year with trade deadline season where you start to get some rumors. So we have a lot of fun over there. And as always, Grant, I appreciate you having me on.
Now, more From the Diamond with Grant McAuley.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on Sunday. The weekend, the sun is setting on that. The Braves will be coming on home and starting a nice little 6-game stand against the Toronto Blue Jays for 3. Then the Pittsburgh Pirates after that. We'll talk a little bit about those series and those games and maybe how the Braves are going to line up their pitching staff as well as we move along here. But I did want to talk a bit, at least, about what's been going on in the Braves pitching staff here lately, because we've seen a lot of good things this year. And there's one guy I'm going to talk about that I think is kind of finally getting his due, because he's just never been the lead story or even the lead name in the Braves bullpen. So stick around for that. But let's talk about the rotation first, because the storylines that we've seen, especially on this road trip, I mean, Spencer Strider was kind of a mixed bag in 2 starts. He came into Sunday, and I was looking at the numbers. Walks higher than you want him to be, but opponents hitting $170 against him, so it's hard to argue with that part of the equation. He's not giving up a ton of hits, but when he does give up a hit, there's been a propensity for some of them to leave the park a little bit. We saw this 2 home runs back-to-back against Boston, first 2 hitters of the game, and you thought, oh no, here we go. But to Spencer Strider's credit, he was able to work his way through that and settle in and get the Braves the innings that you wouldn't have necessarily thought through 2 batters that you were about to get in that game. But the walks, again, have been a little bit troublesome, and he's also getting some swing and miss, which is what we expect to see. I think Spencer was up to 98 in his start on Sunday, so he's been able to dial it up. Mostly 95, 96 is what I've seen a lot of. A little bit more at times, a little bit less at times. I'll suffice it to this. There's no way that he's happy yet with his results because, again, much like Austin Riley, who hasn't been able to find the consistency that he wants, Spencer Strider's not there yet either. And this is a guy that, again, had to go through an injury that slowed him down coming out of spring training, the oblique strain. Thankfully, I think the Braves found it in a timely enough manner in which he didn't go out and make that start, because Walt Weiss told me that would have probably been a disaster. If we'd had him go out there and start that game, dial it all the way up, the intensity, and start throwing, it might have been 3 months, 4 months. Who knows? With oblique injuries, the higher the grade, obviously, the more severe that it is. That's why it was fortunate that they were able to work through, even without Spencer Strider, the way the rotation was over that first month to 5 weeks. And now you have him back, and now I think he's just little by little starting to piece it together. There are some signs that it's obviously in there. There were some signs last year, but the fastball was the number one project I felt like for Spencer Strider to go and kind of reclaim that, like that reclamation project of I need more movement on this fastball, more inverted break. That's the big thing for him. It had kind of gotten into that league average area, and I told you, even with Didier Fuentes, you put 100 miles an hour down the middle enough times, guys are going to time it up. There was a great quote from Eddie Matthews, one of the great overlooked Hall of Famers of all time. And yes, that's a real statement. How can you be in the Hall of Fame and overlooked? Well, go look up Eddie Matthews because he's probably that guy. But he said, look, you can fly a jet plane through the strike zone enough times, and I'm going to time it up. And that pretty much has always stuck with me as, yeah, you can throw hard, but eventually you're also dealing with the best hitters in the world as well. So it's never really been about that, I think, for Spencer Strider. Yes, he does throw hard, but that's not the only thing. The sliders, his big swing and miss pitch, if he gets the fastball slider combo working the way that he did and mixes in a curveball and a changeup that I think have really added some extra dimension to the way he's pitching, I think he's got an opportunity to be, it may not be the same version that he was in 2023 and 2022, but a very good one. A guy that can be among the National League strikeout leaders and a guy that can throw meaningful innings and pitch important games for the Atlanta Braves, and you feel good about him being out there on the mound doing that thing. And you're going to need it, to be quite frank, because you signed him to an extension that all of a sudden jumped up to being a $20 million a year pitcher. That started this year. That part of it, like the escalation of the salaries, was a little bit quicker with him than it was with some of the other extensions that you signed. And there's still significant time left on that. But they'd like to see Spencer Strider get back to the business of being the dominating pitcher that he has been. It doesn't have to look exactly the same as it did before, but you'd like to see a lot of it. I'll put it that way. But the Braves rotation has been able to keep things going, even without Spencer Strider for a period of time. You had Chris Sale continuing to be a dominant force. I mean, it is like he has just walked in and grabbed the hands of time and just held them in place. Because the Chris Sale that I was watching in Boston, and the Chris Sale really that we've been watching his 2.5 years now in Atlanta going on, has looked as good as the guy ever was for the Red Sox and as good as he ever was for the White Sox, if not better. This is a Hall of Fame pitcher you're watching every fifth or sixth day when he goes out there. So every rotation will be happy to have one of those. Now, Bryce Elder, probably not closing in on his Cooperstown case just yet, but I'll give this kid a lot of credit. We're talking about 4 years of Bryce Elder with the Atlanta Braves. Had never made the opening day roster until this year. Only made the opening day roster this year because you had multiple injuries to other starters. You had Spencer Strider down. You had Spencer Schwellenbach down. You had Hurston Waldrop down. And even if they were thinking about starting Waldrop in the minors, you still were missing two of your main starters, who both happen to be named Spencer. And since you didn't have a third Spencer to put in there, you called on Bryce Elder. And all he's done is build on the success that he had down the stretch last year and make his arsenal better, more diverse, multiple versions of his fastball, very good slider, changeup. It's really been kind of one of the stories of the year in a lot of ways. I'm not saying that the Bryce Elder show is the show that everybody necessarily signed up for, but you're definitely glad that it's taken place because Bryce has been a big reason that the Braves rotation has been able to, more times than not, set up the bullpen to have success because the bullpen's kind of been in a weird place, especially when you consider that Didier Fuentes and Reynaldo Lopez not always available to you. Tyler Kinley got a little bit overworked. Aaron Bummer did not work out at all. He did sign with the Cubs, though. I did see that earlier this week. Don't know that that's going to help the Cubs turn around what's been a significant downturn for them, but Godspeed. You got Dylan Dodd in there now. That could help out the Braves. And then you've got that three-headed monster because you've got Dylan Lee, you've got Raisel Iglesias, and you've got Robert Suarez. Not in that order. But Dylan Lee is a guy that I think definitely needs to have some attention pointed in his direction. Because while Robert Suarez and Raisel Iglesias are all-star closers, that's their resume, Dylan Lee has just very quietly gone out there and just posted numbers that very few pitchers in Major League Baseball are posting. He is one of just 4 relievers in the sport with a sub-150 ERA this year, striking out 11 or more batters per 9. And when I'm looking at relievers, one of the number one things I'm looking at is, all right, what's their strikeout rate? All right, then I'm going to look at what their walk rate is because I want to know. And then as soon as I look at the walk rate, I'm going to look at the hit rate because you can't have trouble in both those columns, and everything else will work itself out. And that's been my experience. You miss enough bats and you don't give up many base runners, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. And that's Dylan Lee to a T right there. Now, Robert Suarez, as I talked about with Scott Coleman of Hammer Territory just a few minutes ago, you expected him to be a difference maker. He was arguably the best closer and most consistent closer in the National League the last couple of years. And when you talk about the teammate factor of what the Braves were selling, I guess, if you want to call it that, to Robert Suarez to have him come here, the fact that he said, okay, I'll set up for Raisel Iglesias, no problem. Now, it's a 3-year deal for Suarez. He could end up closing next year. He ended up closing when Iglesias was out for a little while. Kind of nice to have options. Kind of nice to be able to stack up those pieces. And it's also nice to see Tyler Kinley getting himself back on track to go along with Dylan Lee, who, again, is deserving of the flowers he's starting to get. As I'm seeing on social media, people are starting to realize maybe Dylan Lee is one of the better-kept secrets among relievers in the National League, if not all of baseball. But Tyler Kinley, who was picked up from the Rockies, has turned into, I think, a decent option for the Braves to stack in to those other three. But after a bumpy couple of weeks ago, he has tossed 6 straight scoreless innings, allowed just 2 hits with no walks and 8 strikeouts. A lot more like the Tyler Kinley you expected to see. So, for those that were kind of thinking, all right, we got a problem here, we got to change this piece out, sometimes you just got to be a little bit more patient to allow the guys to go through the valleys that will bring them to that next mountaintop. It's a long journey, to make a long story short. And a guy who's had a long journey in his career and has ended up in Atlanta and ended up helping out immensely is Martin Perez. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but he was at it again over the weekend, and he's been a critical piece, a guy that for Atlanta's rotation to be able to keep things on track, you have to have somebody that, and Walt Weiss has kind of joked about this, have had to have all kinds of conversations with Martin. The Braves had to cut him loose at one point, DFA him because they were in a roster crunch. They brought him back. He signed a minor league contract, and he's been able to pitch in relief when you need him to, but he's also been able to make a heck of a lot of starts when you've needed him to, and he has helped keep this rotation just kind of humming right along. He worked into the 5th again on Saturday. The Braves bullpen took care of the rest, 4 1/3 scoreless innings after that. But a lot of respect for a veteran for what he's been able to do, both on the mound and the fit that he is in the clubhouse. And that's one of those things that it's an intangible. But if you spend some time around the team, which I do, and you start to just hear the reputation, you start to hear the respect factor that's built in there, it's a nice thing to have when you start to collect a bunch of guys like that. And when I talked to Mauricio Dubon last week, and you can hear this again from the Diamond, wherever you get your podcast, just go to last week's episode, is a quick chat with Mauricio about just how this team is comprised. And he said, look, if I'm not out there, I'm going to do whatever I can do to kind of help anybody who is in there with what I see. And they do the same for me. This is a team that's not only some good players, some talented players, but there's a lot of credit to be given for exactly what kind of people that you bring in. And we could get lost in the weeds in a conversation like this. And, well, are you just settling for nice guys and not necessarily going after the best talents? I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive. But it's a lot easier to put together a team that can win together, stay together, play together, when you don't have a bunch of personalities that are polarizing and that are not willing to just step in and everybody pulls the rope in the same direction. I mean, the Braves were able to, I think, over the years, throughout the 1990s, into the 2000s, Bobby Cox, I think this is one of the things that he was best at, was getting people to buy in. About the only one that you hear about that didn't, and I'm sure there were reasons for it, including being traded right before opening day, was Kenny Lofton. Kenny Lofton just wasn't a fit with the Braves. I can tell you this, as far as growing up a Braves fan, one of the most painful trades in the history of the franchise for me was David Justice and Marquise Grissom for Kenny Lofton and Alan Embry. No thanks. Now I understand, and John Schuerholz has written a book, and John Schuerholz has pulled off many more successful deals than I have as a baseball executive, that there was some calculus about being able to sign Glavine and Maddox and Smoltz and keep them around, and those guys were awfully important. But man, Marquise Grissom caught the last out of the 95 World Series. David Justice hit the home run that backed up Tom Glavine that helped the Braves win the World Series. And a year plus later, they're both playing for the Cleveland Indians in the World Series against the Miami Marlins, Florida Marlins, who sent the Braves home thanks to the Eric Gregg strike zone, among other things. See how all these things are connected? When you really start to pull out the home version of the Braves Misery Index and start assembling it for yourself, you can see how a lot of these things are just all overlapping. A couple of other Braves notes before we get out of here. As I talked about the Braves offense kind of reaching another level, well, I think that's going to be happening if you get a Ronald Acuña Jr. going the way he has been over this past weekend or this past road trip. Hopefully we'll have some updates on Drake Baldwin when the team gets back in town on Tuesday. He'll be eligible to come off the IL. I don't know that 10-day stint is going to be all that is going to take for him, but hopefully we'll start to get a better timeline, an idea of when Drake Baldwin could be back in the Braves lineup, as Walt Weiss said about 10 days ago, sooner than later. But how about Ha-Seong Kim? Now, his slow start has been one of the few lowlights for the Braves overall. And I can't stress enough how early it still is in the season. We've still got 100-plus games to go, 102 games to go. But I also don't think it's too soon or a bad idea to do exactly what Walt Weiss did over the course of this road trip, and that is give at bats to Jorge Mateo to help the offense continue to roll a little bit, to give Kim a chance to maybe just take a little bit of a breather, and then get him back in the lineup the way he did on Sunday And I think that Kim's going to be sorting this thing out. But he missed all of his spring training. He had a very short rehab assignment. I am sure that in getting back to play with a contender again and trying to get his competitive juices flowing again and get back to the level that you want to be at, he's been kind of drinking from a fire hose, if you will. He's been running behind the truck trying to catch up everybody. But we'll see how soon Ha-Seong Kim can start to kind of get back to the player that we saw in 23-24 with the Padres, who was a very, very good player. Good defender, good base runner, good hitter, a guy that can add something to this club. But what we've seen the past few days is that Jorge Mateo could also add some things to this club. So Mateo homered again on Sunday. Nice little modest 5-game hitting streak going, well over 300 as well on the season now. But Kim, heading into Sunday, 4 for 42 to start the year. So it's been a tough run. Meanwhile, coming up for the Braves, it's an off day on Monday. Then you get Tuesday. Toronto Blue Jays are going to roll into town, and they will play Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at Truist Park. And Friday through the weekend, it's the Pittsburgh Pirates who will be rolling in. Probables for the Blue Jays series, I think if it lines up, it's Elder, Sale, and Holmes, though that could be adjusted to see how exactly they want to, go into the weekend and who exactly could be helping out. When Martin Perez, Spencer Strider would start again. If there's anybody else that they'd like to mix in at this point, they've pretty much gone back to that 5-man rotation. So I would expect that to be the group and the order in which they're going to be going as well. But that's what's going on for the Braves coming up this week. I want to thank Scott Coleman again for taking the time to join me. He, of course, of the Hammer Territory podcast. Make sure you subscribe there. Also, make sure you subscribe to From the Diamond, wherever you get your podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app as well. I am on social media at Grant McAuley on most platforms, including all the fun baseball card stuff I'm doing, so please check that out. Thanks to my producer, Dom, for running a great show again today, and thank you to all of you for joining me here on From the Diamond. We'll be back again next Sunday. Until then, I've been Grant McAuley. So long, everyone.